Elijah went up to heaven alive, without dying, without getting sick, without growing old. A chariot of fire came down and took him with the body he was wearing. But that's not the strange part. The strange part is that nobody else received that privilege. Billions of human beings have walked this earth, from Adam's first breath to the last baby born while you're listening to this. Billions were born, lived, grew old, and died. All of them, without apparent exception. Abraham died, the father of faith, the friend of God, the man whom Yahweh personally visited in his tent by the oaks of Mamre. He died. Genesis 25:8 says it with a clarity that hurts. Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Moses died, the man who spoke with God face to face as one speaks with a friend, the man who parted the Red Sea, who received the 10 Commandments directly from divine hands. He died. Deuteronomy 34:5 records that Moses, the servant of Yahweh, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. David died, the man after God's own heart. 1 Kings 2:10 says David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. Even Jesus died, the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, the Word who was God and was with God before the foundation of the world. He died nailed to a Roman cross on Golgotha. Matthew 27:50 records that Jesus cried out with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. If Abraham died, if Moses died, if David died, if the very Son of God experienced death in his own flesh, then the question that should keep you awake tonight is this: what was different about Elijah? What did a man from Gilead have? With no known genealogy, no registered family, no priestly pedigree, no official title, what did that man have that made God decide death would simply not touch him? Because that's exactly what happened. 2 Kings 2:11 says Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. He didn't die, he didn't get sick, he didn't age until his body stopped working. A chariot of fire with horses of fire appeared out of nowhere and separated him from Elisha, and Elijah went up to heaven in the middle of a supernatural whirlwind. Alive. In the entire Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, only 2 people experienced this: Enoch and Elijah. Out of the billions of human beings who have ever existed, only 2 avoided death entirely, and one of them is the protagonist of what you're about to hear. But there's something you need to understand before I give you the answer. Something that changes the way you'll read every verse about Elijah from today on. And it has to do with a Hebrew word your translations never showed you correctly. Stay, because what's coming is not what you expect. Let's start with the most uncomfortable part. There's a question almost nobody asks when reading Elijah's story, and it's the most obvious one of all. Why did God choose this specific man to never die? Think about it for a second. If you were God and could choose one person in the entire Old Testament to take alive to heaven as the supreme demonstration of your power and favor, who would you choose? The logical answer would be Moses, the liberator of Israel, the lawgiver, the mediator of the covenant, the man who saw God's glory and whose face shone so brightly he had to cover it with a veil, according to Exodus 34:29-35. Or you'd choose Abraham, the father of all nations, the man of unshakable faith who was willing to sacrifice his own son. Or maybe David, the warrior poet, king worshipper who wrote half the Psalms and whose throne God promised would last forever. But God didn't choose any of them. He chose Elijah, a man we know absolutely nothing about before he appears in 1 Kings 17:1. No family mentioned, no known teacher, no prophetic school that trained him, a stranger from a remote region east of the Jordan who bursts into the biblical narrative like lightning from a clear sky. And that's already a clue, because when God chooses the least obvious candidate, there's always a deep theological reason behind it, always. And in Elijah's case, That reason has 5 layers that connect from Genesis to Revelation, like a chain no one has broken in 3,000 years. The first layer is the one that impacted me the most when I discovered it, and it has to do with something James wrote in his letter, almost like a side note, but which is actually the master key that unlocks everything else. James 5:17, a single verse, 17 words in the original Greek. And within those 17 words lies the first reason why Elijah never died. The text says this: Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. In Greek, the phrase is Elias anthropos and homoiopathes emin. And the word that changes everything is homoiopathes. It literally means of equal sufferings, of the same emotional nature, of identical human vulnerability. James isn't saying Elijah was a good man. He's not saying he was a spiritual hero. He's saying exactly the opposite. He's saying Elijah was as fragile, as vulnerable, as emotionally unstable as you and me. And the Bible proves it without mercy. 1 Kings 19:4. After the most spectacular victory in Israel's prophetic history, after calling down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel in front of 450 prophets of Baal, after executing every one of them by the brook Kishon, after praying until the rain returned, after 3.5 years of drought, after all of that, Elijah received a threat from Jezebel, a threat. A single woman threatened him, and the text says he was afraid. The man who faced 450 alone was afraid of one woman. And he didn't just feel fear, he ran a full day's journey into the wilderness, sat down under a broom tree, and asked God to kill him. "It is enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." Elijah asked to die. The man God had decided would never die asked to die. The irony is devastating. You're looking at someone God had already destined for eternity without passing through the grave, and that someone is begging for his life to be taken. That's not an action hero. That's a broken human being, and that is exactly James's point. Elijah was homoiopathes, made of the same stuff as you. Now, why does this matter for understanding his rapture? Because the first reason God chose Elijah to never die is precisely because he was weak. If you think God takes the strongest, the holiest, the most perfect person alive to heaven, you just discovered you're wrong. God chose the man who wanted to die, the one who fled in terror, the one who sat under a tree crying in the desert, the one who told God he couldn't go on. And in that choice, there's a theological message that runs through the entire scripture. Grace doesn't seek merit. Elijah's rapture wasn't a reward for good behavior. It was a declaration that God's power is made perfect in weakness, exactly what Paul would write 1,000 years later in 2 Corinthians 12:9. If that touched something inside you, hit like right now, because what's coming next is even deeper, but there's a second layer. And this is the one that connects Elijah directly to something that hasn't happened yet. Open Malachi 4:5-6. It's literally the last message of the Old Testament before God goes silent for 400 years. The last words. And look at what it says. "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and dreadful day of Yahweh comes. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse." God closes the Old Testament with a specific promise. Elijah returns, not metaphorically, not symbolically. The prophet Elijah comes back before the end. And this is where you need to understand something that changes the equation completely. If Elijah had died, his return would require a resurrection. God would have to pull him from the grave, rebuild his body, restore his life. And although God can do that perfectly, there's a pattern in Scripture that suggests something different. Elijah's rapture wasn't just an act of mercy. It was divine logistics. God took Elijah alive because he needed him alive for later, not dead and resurrected. alive, with the same body, the same identity, the same prophetic anointing intact. And this connects to something that happened 700 years before Malachi that very few people link together. When God took Enoch in Genesis 5:24, the text says, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. The Hebrew word translated as took him is lakaj, and lakaj carries a nuance the translation doesn't capture. It doesn't simply mean he took him the way someone picks up a package. It means he took for himself, received with intention, acquired with purpose. God didn't remove Enoch from the world like someone pulling a piece off a board. He took him for himself, like someone claiming what belongs to them. And the same theology operates in Elijah's rapture. 2 Kings 2:3 says that Yahweh is going to take your master from over you. The Hebrew word here is lakaj again, the same verb, the same intention, the same divine act of taking for himself. But there's a fundamental difference between Enoch and Elijah that nobody explains, and that reveals a deliberate design. Enoch lived before the flood, before the law, before Abraham, before Israel, before any formal covenant between God and a specific people. Enoch represented all of humanity. He was a descendant of Seth, not of any particular tribe. His rapture was a message for the entire human race, without distinction of nation or covenant. Elijah lived after the law, after Moses, after the formation of Israel as a nation, after the Sinai covenant. Elijah represented the covenant people. He was an Israelite, a prophet of Israel. His rapture was a specific message for the people God had chosen. Do you see the pattern? God raptured a representative of humanity at large and a representative of the chosen people. Two testimonies, two witnesses, two categories of people who were taken out of this world without passing through death. And there's another detail that amplifies this. Genesis 5:23 says Enoch lived 365 years. He's the only antediluvian patriarch whose age corresponds exactly to the number of days in a solar year. All the others lived seemingly random numbers. Adam 930, Seth 912, Methuselah 969. But Enoch lived 365, as if his entire life were one complete year before God, a perfect cycle. And when that cycle was completed, God took him. Elijah also completed a cycle. He anointed his 3 successors. He fulfilled every assigned mission. He closed every open chapter. And when the cycle was complete, the chariot of fire descended. God doesn't rapture in the middle of an assignment. He raptures at the end of a complete cycle. Hold on to that idea, because in a few minutes you're going to need it to understand something in Revelation that very few preachers explain correctly. Now let's move to the third layer, and this one requires you to travel with me to a mountain, not just any mountain, a high mountain somewhere in Galilee, or maybe on the slopes of Hermon. The Gospels don't specify exactly which one, but what happened there is one of the strangest and most revealing events in the entire New Testament. Matthew 17:1-3. Jesus took Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Stop for a second. Of all the Old Testament characters who could have appeared alongside Jesus at the most glorious moment of his earthly ministry, why Moses and Elijah? Why not Abraham, the father of faith? Why not David, the royal ancestor of Jesus? Why not Isaiah, who prophesied about the Messiah more than any other prophet? There's a reason, and it's chilling when you understand it. Moses represented the law, the Torah, the first 5 books, the Sinai covenant, the entire legal system of Israel. Elijah represented the prophets, the Nevi'im, the voice of God that confronted, corrected, and announced what was to come. Law and prophets, the two main divisions of the Hebrew Old Testament, the two pillars upon which all of God's revelation before Christ rested. And both were there, on that mountain, talking with Jesus. Luke 9:31 adds a detail Matthew omits. It says they were speaking about his departure, which Jesus was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. The Greek word Luke uses for departure is exodon, Exodus, the same word that describes Israel's departure from Egypt. Moses and Elijah were discussing with Jesus about his exodus, his departure, his death and resurrection. The law and the prophets were confirming that everything they had announced over centuries was about to be fulfilled in the person standing before them. But there's something else that almost no one notices. Moses was there as someone who died and was resurrected for this appearance. Deuteronomy 34:5 confirms his death. His presence on the mountain required a supernatural post-mortem intervention. Elijah was there as someone who never died. His presence didn't require resurrection because he never needed it. He was alive. He'd been alive for more than 900 years since his rapture. One resurrected from the dead and one raptured alive, both together before Christ. If you just connected these two texts for the first time, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because this connection changes everything that follows. And what follows is Revelation. Chapter 11, verses 3 through 12. And this is where everything before makes sense in a way that will leave you speechless. John writes that God will send two witnesses who will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. They will have power to shut the sky so that no rain falls during the days of their prophecy. They will have power to turn the waters to blood and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they desire. Read that again slowly. Power to shut the sky so that no rain falls. Who did that in the Old Testament? Elijah, 1 Kings 17:1. He shut the sky for 3.5 years. Power to turn the waters to blood and strike the earth with plagues. Who did that? Moses, in Egypt, the 10 plagues of Exodus 7 through 12. The two witnesses of Revelation have exactly the same powers as Moses and Elijah, exactly the same. Not similar powers, the same. And remember what we saw a moment ago on the Mount of Transfiguration. Moses and Elijah appeared together before Jesus, one resurrected from the dead and one raptured alive. And in Revelation, the two witnesses will appear together before the entire world. The Jewish tradition expected it. At every Passover meal to this day, Orthodox Jews open the door of the house toward the night and reserve a cup of wine for Elijah, Kos Shel Eliyahu, the cup of Elijah. No one drinks it. The chair remains empty, because Malachi promised he would return, and the Christian tradition confirms it from another angle. Jesus himself said in Matthew 17:11-12 that Elijah indeed is coming first and will restore all things. But he also said Elijah has already come, referring to John the Baptist, who came in the spirit and power of Elijah, according to Luke 4:17. But John died beheaded in Herod's prison. If John was the complete fulfillment of Malachi, why does Jesus say Elijah will come and restore all things in the future tense? Because there was a partial fulfillment in John, and there will be a total fulfillment in the two witnesses of Revelation. Elijah's rapture guaranteed, he would be available for that final mission. God pulled him off the earthly game board in the 9th century before Christ to reinsert him at the most critical moment in human history, before the great and dreadful day of Yahweh, exactly as Malachi prophesied. Now you need to understand something about the way Elijah was raptured, because the method was not accidental. Nothing in the Bible is accidental. 2 Kings 2:11 says a chariot of fire with horses of fire came between Elijah and Elisha. The Hebrew word for chariot is rekev, and the word for fire is esh, rekev esh, chariot of fire. But what most people don't know is that the same expression appears in another place in the Bible with a completely different context that changes the reading. 2 Kings 6:17. Elisha is surrounded by the Syrian army in Dothan. His servant is terrified, and Elisha prays for God to open the young man's eyes. And when God opens his eyes, the servant sees the mountain full of horses of fire and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Rekev esh, the same expression, the same chariots, the same horses. What this reveals is that the chariots of fire were not created specially for Elijah's rapture. They were already there. They had always been there. They are part of the heavenly army that surrounds God's servants at all times. What changed on the day of the rapture wasn't that chariots appeared that didn't exist before. What changed was that they became visible in the physical realm to fulfill a specific mission. God didn't improvise the rapture. He sent his royal escort. And what I'm about to show you about that escort is going to change the way you read every spiritual battle in the Bible. Because the chariots that came for Elijah didn't disappear, they're still operating. Psalm 68:17 says, "The chariots of God are tens of thousands and thousands upon thousands." And one of those thousands descended to take a man from Gilead, who 60 years earlier had been a nobody with no name or family. But there's something else about the method of the rapture that nobody explains. And it has to do with the word whirlwind, se'arah in Hebrew. 2 Kings 2:11 says Elijah went up to heaven beserah, in a whirlwind, not in a cloud, not in silence, not gently floating upward, in a whirlwind. The same word appears in Job 38:1. Then Yahweh answered Job out of the whirlwind, min hase'arah, out of the whirlwind. And it appears again in Ezekiel 1:4. I looked, and behold, a great windstorm was coming from the north, ruach se'arah, a great cloud with fire flashing. And in the midst of the fire, the vision of the cherubim and the throne of God. Do you see the pattern? The whirlwind in the Hebrew Bible is the signature of God's presence in motion. It's not a meteorological phenomenon, it's a theophany. It's God manifesting himself in the physical realm. When Elijah went up in the whirlwind, he wasn't carried by a natural phenomenon. He was enveloped by the very presence of God. The whirlwind was God coming to get him personally. This changes everything. It wasn't an angel that came for Elijah. It wasn't a cherub or a seraph. It was Yahweh himself manifested in his whirlwind form. The same form in which he spoke to Job, the same form in which he revealed himself to Ezekiel. If you needed a second to process that, subscribe to the channel, because what's coming now is the deepest layer of all. Now I want you to do something with me. I want you to look at Elijah's life from an angle that probably nobody ever showed you. Not from the angle of power, not from the angle of miracles, from the angle of loneliness. Because Elijah was the loneliest man in the Bible. 1 Kings 19:10, I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it. That's what he told God in the cave at Horeb. And it wasn't simply an emotional outburst. It was his honest perception of reality. For years he had walked alone, confronted alone, prophesied alone, fled alone, wept alone. There's no record that Elijah had a wife, no mention of children, no family waiting for him at home after facing 450 prophets, no friends to accompany him when Jezebel threatened him with death. When he fled to the wilderness in 1 Kings 19, the text says, he left his servant in Beersheba and went alone into the desert. He didn't even take the servant. And Jezebel's threat needs context to be understood. This woman was no decorative queen. She was the daughter of Ethbaal, king and priest of Sidon, according to 1 Kings 16:31. Her name in Phoenician probably meant, "Where is the prince?" a ritual invocation to Baal. She had imported to Israel 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah who ate at her table, according to 1 Kings 18:19. She had systematically ordered the killing of Yahweh's prophets, and only 100 survived because Obadiah hid them in caves, according to 1 Kings 18:4. When Jezebel sent the message to Elijah saying that by the next day she would do to him what he had done to the prophets of Baal, it wasn't an empty threat. It was the promise of a woman who had already demonstrated the capacity to carry out mass executions of prophets. Elijah knew she was serious, and his body reacted before his faith did. And there, beneath that broom tree, alone, exhausted, terrified, depressed to the point of wanting to die, something happened that you need to see up close. The smell of dry earth, the suffocating heat of the Negev, the branches of the broom tree barely providing enough shade for a curled-up body that doesn't want to go on anymore. Cracked lips, eyes closed not to sleep, but to escape. And then a touch. Something touches him. An angel, 1 Kings 19:5. The angel touched him and said, "Arise and eat." By his head there was a cake baked on hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and went back to sleep, and the angel came a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." God didn't scold him, didn't tell him he was weak, didn't remind him he'd just won the most epic battle in prophetic history, didn't quote encouraging verses at him. He gave him food, he gave him water, he let him sleep. And when he woke up, he gave him more food. Because sometimes God's answer to depression isn't a sermon, it's a warm loaf of bread. And with the strength of that food, Elijah walked 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. The same mountain where Moses received the 10 Commandments. The same place where God had revealed himself 500 years earlier in thunder, lightning, and fire. And when Elijah arrived at the cave and God asked him what he was doing there, God's response wasn't what Elijah expected. He didn't come in the earthquake. He didn't come in the fire. He didn't come in the crushing wind. He came in a still, small voice. In Hebrew, kol demama daka, and that phrase is impossible to translate perfectly. Kol means voice or sound. Demama means silence or stillness. Daka means thin, fine, subtle. It is literally the sound of subtle silence, a linguistic paradox, a sound that is silence, a voice that is stillness. The King James translates it a still, small voice. The NIV says a gentle whisper, but no translation captures the paradox of the Hebrew. It's a deliberate oxymoron. God chose to reveal himself through a linguistic contradiction, as if he wanted to tell Elijah that the way he had understood divine power until now was incomplete. The fire on Carmel was real. The earthquake was real, the crushing wind was real, but God was not in any of them. He was in what no human ear should be able to hear, in the sound that can only be heard when everything else falls silent, when the ego falls silent, when fear falls silent, when despair finally exhausts itself and only the void remains where God can speak. God was teaching him something that very few people understand about the divine character. His greatest power is not manifested in the spectacular, it's manifested in the imperceptible. The same God who sent fire from heaven on Carmel reveals himself in the faintest whisper in the universe when his servant is broken. And this connects directly to the rapture, because Elijah's rapture was spectacular. Fire, horses, whirlwind, thunder, open heaven. All the cosmic power unleashed in an instant to take a man alive, but the preparation for that rapture was silent. It was bread next to the head of a sleeping man. It was a jar of water in the desert. It was a whisper in a cave. It was God saying, "Before I take you in glory, I'm going to take care of you in the darkness." And there's something in this sequence you probably never noticed. Between the cave at Horeb and the rapture in 2 Kings 2, Elijah received 3 final assignments from God. 1 Kings 19:15-16. Anoint Hazael as king over Syria, anoint Jehu as king over Israel, and anoint Elisha as prophet in your place. 3 anointings, 3 final acts, 3 closing missions before departure. And when he finished, the chariot of fire descended. God didn't take him until he completed everything he had to do. He didn't rapture him in the middle of the work. He didn't pull him from the world ahead of schedule. He pulled him when every mission was fulfilled, when every person who needed to be anointed was anointed, when every word that needed to be spoken had been spoken. The rapture wasn't a reward for what Elijah did right. It was the next step in a plan that Elijah didn't even know existed. Now I want to take you to a detail that most people overlook and that connects everything we've seen with something that will happen in the future. On the day of the rapture, Elijah took a specific route. 2 Kings 2:1-6 records that he went from Gilgal to Bethel, from Bethel to Jericho, and from Jericho to the Jordan. 3 stops. And at each stop, he told Elisha to stay behind because Yahweh was sending him to the next place. And at each stop, Elisha refused to leave. But the fascinating thing isn't Elisha's loyalty. The fascinating thing is the route. Gilgal was Israel's first camp after crossing the Jordan under Joshua, the place where Israel was circumcised a second time after 40 years in the wilderness. The place where the manna ceased because they were already in the promised land, according to Joshua 5:10-12. Gilgal represented the beginning. Bethel was the place where Jacob had the dream of the ladder connecting heaven and earth in Genesis 28:12-19. The place where God made covenant with Jacob. Bethel represented divine revelation. Jericho was Israel's first conquest in the Promised Land. The city that fell by faith, according to Joshua 6, not by military force. Jericho represented victory by supernatural intervention. And the Jordan was the border, the boundary between the wilderness and the promise, the place where Israel crossed on dry ground and where Naaman the Syrian was healed of leprosy. Elijah, on his last day on earth, walked back through the most significant points in Israel's history, from the beginning to revelation, from revelation to victory, from victory to the final crossing. It was as if God was leading him on a farewell tour, touching every sacred milestone before pulling him out of the world. And when they reached the Jordan, Elijah did something that sealed his connection to the entire biblical narrative. He took his mantle, folded it, and struck the water. And the waters parted. 2 Kings 2:8. The Hebrew word for mantle here is aderet. It's not the generic word for clothing. Aderet comes from the root adar, which means to be glorious, to be majestic. Elijah's mantle was not an ordinary garment. It was a robe of glory, a badge of prophetic authority. When Elijah threw it over Elisha in 1 Kings 19:19, he was transmitting his calling. When he used it to strike the Jordan, he was exercising the authority God had deposited in him. And the waters parted. Where have we read that before? Moses parted the Red Sea with his staff in Exodus 14. Joshua parted the Jordan with the ark in Joshua 3. And now Elijah parts the Jordan with his mantle. 3 men, 3 different instruments, staff, ark, mantle, but the same result and the same God behind each one. And what few people notice is the progression. Moses used a staff, an inert object that temporarily received power. Joshua used the ark, the receptacle of God's presence that contained the tablets of the law. Elijah used his own mantle, something he wore, something that was part of him. The progression goes from the external to the intimate, from a borrowed object to something personal, as if God were showing that his power draws closer and closer to the human being until it becomes part of him. And that progression culminates in the New Testament when Peter healed with his shadow in Acts 5:15 and Paul with the handkerchiefs that touched his skin in Acts 19:12. The channel of power was no longer an object, it was the person himself. Elijah stands at the exact midpoint of that progression, and his mantle is the bridge between power mediated by objects and power that emanates directly from the human being surrendered to God. And there's something more about that mantle you need to know before we see the moment of the rapture, because what Elijah did with it after crossing the Jordan contains a lesson the modern church has almost entirely forgotten. It's the same power, the same authority, the same God working through different instruments but with the same result. And Elijah is being deliberately placed in the same category as Moses and Joshua, not as inferior, as equal, and they crossed on dry ground, both of them, master and disciple. And on the other side of the Jordan, outside the Promised Land, in foreign territory, Elijah asked Elisha the final question, "What do you want me to do for you before I am taken from you?" Elisha didn't ask for wealth. He didn't ask for protection. He didn't ask for fame. He asked for a double portion of your spirit. And in the culture of ancient Israel, the double portion didn't mean double the power. It was the firstborn's inheritance according to Deuteronomy 21:17. The eldest son received a double portion of the father's inheritance. Elisha was claiming to be Elijah's spiritual firstborn son, his legitimate heir, his official successor. And Elijah responded with something strange. "You have asked a hard thing. If you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if not, it shall not be so." The condition was seeing. If you see the rapture with your own eyes, you will receive what you asked for. Why the condition to see? Because faith in the Bible isn't always blind. Sometimes God demands that you look directly at the impossible, that you don't look away, that you don't blink when fire falls from heaven, that you fix your gaze on the supernatural manifestation without recoiling in terror. And Elisha looked. He didn't close his eyes when the chariot of fire descended. He didn't cover his face when the celestial horses came between him and his master. He didn't turn his head when the whirlwind roared with the sound of eternity opening. He saw Elijah go up, and the mantle fell, and with that mantle, Elisha performed 16 documented miracles in Scripture, exactly double Elijah's 8 miracles. The double portion was literal. But there's something nobody asks after the rapture that is crucial. Where did Elijah go? 2 Kings 2:11 says to heaven, in Hebrew, Hashemayim. But Shemayim in the Bible doesn't always mean the same place. It can refer to the atmosphere, to space, or to the very presence of God. Paul speaks in 2 Corinthians 12:2 of a man caught up to the third heaven. The first heaven is the atmosphere, the second is space, the third is the dwelling place of God. The text doesn't specify which of the 3 heavens Elijah went to, but Jewish tradition, based on various Talmudic sources such as Sanhedrin, Berakot, and Eruvin, as well as medieval rabbinic commentaries, holds that Elijah was taken to the direct presence of God, to the third heaven, to the place where the seraphim cover their faces and cry, "Holy, holy, holy." And from there, according to Malachi 4:5, he will return. And this brings us to the final layer, the deepest one, the one that connects Elijah to you. 1 Thessalonians 4:16-17. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. The Greek word Paul uses for caught up is harpagesometha. It comes from harpazo, which means to seize by force, to snatch violently, to take with irresistible power. It's the same idea as Elijah's whirlwind. It's not a gentle ascent, it's a violent rapture. And harpazo appears in other places in the New Testament that confirm this sense of supernatural violence. In Acts 8:39, the Spirit of the Lord caught up Philip after he baptized the Ethiopian eunuch. Harpazo, Philip was instantaneously transported from one place to another. In Revelation 12:5, the male child was caught up to God and to his throne. Harpazo again. It's an act of forceful rescue. God doesn't ask permission. God doesn't negotiate. God takes. And that's exactly what he did with Elijah by the Jordan. He took him with fire, with whirlwind, with celestial horses. He snatched him from this world like someone rescuing a person from a burning building, not with gentleness, with urgency. The Latin version of this verse uses the word raptus, from which we get rapture in English and rapto in Spanish. The entire doctrine of the rapture of the church is linguistically connected to what happened to Elijah 3,000 years earlier. It's not coincidence, it's design. And look at the structure. The dead in Christ rise first. Then those who are alive are caught up, dead raised and living raptured. Together. Does that sound familiar? Isn't that exactly what we saw on the Mount of Transfiguration? Moses, who died and was resurrected for the appearance. Elijah, who never died and appeared alive. Both together before Christ. The Transfiguration was a dress rehearsal for the rapture. Moses represented the dead in Christ who will be resurrected. Elijah represented the living who will be raptured without passing through death. And Jesus was at the center of both, exactly as he will be at the center of the rapture of the church. Elijah wasn't raptured solely to fulfill a future mission in Revelation. He was raptured to become the living prototype of something that will happen to millions of people when Christ returns. Every believer alive at that moment will experience exactly what Elijah experienced by the Jordan. Fire, glory, whirlwind, open heaven. Body transformed in an instant, ascent into God's presence without passing through death. 1 Corinthians 15:51-52 describes it with surgical precision. Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. We shall not all sleep, we shall not all die. There will be a generation of believers who will never experience death. Exactly like Elijah, exactly like Enoch, they will be transformed in the twinkling of an eye. In Greek, enatomo, in an indivisible instant, in the smallest fraction of time that exists. Paul is saying that what took Elijah a whirlwind and horses of fire will take the future believer less than a blink. Elijah was the rough draft, the first sketch, the live demonstration that a human being with a body of flesh can be taken to heaven without dying. And the fact that God chose to make that demonstration with a man who was afraid, who fled, who asked to die, who was depressed, who felt alone, who believed he was the only faithful one left, that isn't accidental. That's a direct message for every person who has ever felt too broken for God to use them. Imagine an 18-year-old sitting on his bed at 2 in the morning. The house is silent. He has his phone in one hand and an old Bible in the other. He grew up hearing the story of Elijah as just another Sunday school tale. The chariot of fire, the horses, the open heaven. A nice but distant story, like an old movie you've seen so many times it stopped impressing you. But that night, something changes. He opens Thessalonians on his phone, reads verse 17, "We shall be caught up," and suddenly the dots connect. The rapture that's coming isn't a metaphor. It's not an abstract concept for theologians. It's exactly what happened to Elijah. Literally, physically, really. It happened to a man who was also afraid at 2 in the morning, who also wanted to give up, who also felt like he was alone. And in that moment, Elijah's story stops being a tale. It becomes a promise. And that changes everything. Because if Elijah was raptured while being homoiopathes, a man subject to the same weaknesses as you, if he was raptured after being afraid, after running, after being depressed, after wanting to die under a tree, if after all of that God sent the chariots of fire for him, then the condition for the rapture isn't perfection, It's relationship. God didn't take Elijah because he was strong. He took him because he was his. And there's one last piece of the puzzle you need to see before this journey ends. 2 Kings 2:12. Elisha cried out when he saw Elijah go up, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. Avi, Avi, Rekev Yisrael Ufarashav." The cry was twofold. First, my father. Elijah wasn't his biological father. He was his spiritual father, his mentor, his teacher. The man who shaped him, guided him, trained him to carry the prophetic mantle. Second, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. Elisha was saying that Elijah was worth more to Israel's defense than the entire professional army of the king. A single man with direct access to God was more powerful than 1,000 war chariots equipped with the finest soldiers. And that's exactly what Elisha demonstrated in Dothan when the Syrian army surrounded them. And he said with supernatural calm, "Do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And the servant's eyes were opened, and he saw the chariots of fire covering the entire mountain. The same chariots that took Elijah were protecting Elisha. The father's inheritance had passed to the son. The mantle wasn't a piece of cloth, it was the transmission of an authority that came directly from the throne of God. And it all started with a man from Gilead, with no name and no family, who dared to stand before the most wicked king in Israel and tell him to his face that it wouldn't rain until he said so. That's Elijah, a fragile man who served an invincible God, a man who wanted to die but whom God decided death would never touch, a man who received warm bread when he was destroyed and chariots of fire when he was ready, a man who represented everything God can do with someone who simply refuses to bow before Baal. There is a cup of wine on a Passover table right now. Somewhere in the world, a Jewish family filled it and opened the door toward the night, waiting, 3,000 years waiting, because a book called Malachi said he would come, and the door is still open. What you're going to see on screen right now takes this to a level you didn't expect. What we discovered today about Elijah is only the first layer of something much deeper that connects directly to what God is doing right now. If you made it this far, trust me, click. You need to see what comes next.